They say you never forget the sound of your front gate creaking open after a long time away. Mine used to squeal a little to the left like a door hinge on an old barn, and I always swore I'd fix it after the next deployment. I never did. But as the taxi slowed near the gravel shoulder where Maple Trail meets Sycamore Lane, there was no gate. Just a pristine fence, white as teeth and lined with artificial petunias, where the entrance to my yard had been. I sat still for a second, boots on the edge of the curb, trying to make sense of the suburban mirage before me. My duffel bag felt heavier than usual, as if it too sensed something wasn't right. The air smelled like cut grass and chlorine. Not home. I stepped out in full uniform. My tan fatigue still stained with Afghan dust, the kind that clings to you long after you leave the desert. My plan was simple. Surprise Mom. Knock on the door of our white cottage with the blue shutters, collapse into the old couch we bought when Dad passed, and fall asleep to the hum of the porch swing that still creaked even when no one sat on it. That swing was hers. That house was mine. At least that's what I thought. Instead, I found 3 golden retrievers tearing across a freshly laid lawn, their tails wagging, tongues flapping, chasing a neon frisbee that landed right where our living room used to be. I blinked. The living room, with the old ceiling fan that rattled when you turned it to medium. The brick fireplace that burned every Christmas since 1998. The photo frames of Mom, Dad, me in uniform. Gone. In its place, a fenced-in dog park with a plaque that read, Willow Ridge Community Park for peaceful living and communal joy. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't compute what I was seeing. It glitched. A woman in yoga pants looked me up and down like I was the intruder here. She scolded her poodle for sniffing my duffel. I thought maybe I'd gotten the wrong address until I saw it. The sycamore tree. Still there. Bent a little from the storms, bark darkened from years of southern rain, but right where it had always been, just past the garden. My initials were still carved into it. CR 2012. I stood frozen. My yard hadn't been moved. It had been taken, ripped out and replaced, like I never existed. A couple strolled by, sipping green smoothies, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I asked them what happened to the house that was here. The man shrugged and said, some government guy didn't pay his taxes, so the HOA redeveloped the land. Then they kept walking. That's when my heart dropped into my boots. Some government guy. Me. They were talking about me. I had bled for this country, patched wounds in a war zone, dragged civilians out of burning buildings. And I came back to find I'd lost a war I didn't even know I was in. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there. The sound of my own breath louder than mortar fire. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and begs you to scream. But I didn't. Not yet. I spent the next 6 hours pinballing through city buildings. The tax office. The records department. Code enforcement. No one had answers. A clerk finally pulled up my file and told me the land had been listed as delinquent and abandoned 6 months ago. The taxes hadn't been paid. I explained that I'd filed for military exemption before I left. She squinted, typed something, then told me I'd have to speak to the HOA. That's when I heard her name for the first time. Karen Mallister, president of Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. I recognized the type. Sharp nails, sharper tongue. Probably ran the PDA like a battlefield and treated landscaping rules like commandments from the heavens. I found her at the community clubhouse, standing beneath a blown-up canvas of herself labeled Founding Mother. I half expected trumpets to sound. She was mid-lecture, scolding a teenage boy for hanging fairy lights on his fence. When I approached, cleared my throat. She turned, eyes narrowing, lips curling into what can only be described as the smirk of a queen watching a peasant trespass. I introduced myself, told her I used to live at 1428 Maple Trail. Oh, she said, flipping through a manila folder. That lot went unclaimed, taxes unpaid, transferred to the HOA under subdivision protocol. I told her I was on active duty when that happened, that I'd filed exemption under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. She didn't even blink. Instead, she leaned closer and said, Maybe you should have thought about that before abandoning your responsibilities at home. Something inside me cracked. Not like a glass breaking. More like a dam giving way after too much pressure. I reminded her, firmly, calmly, that federal law protected active duty service members from this kind of seizure. She offered me a different lot. It's next to the dumpsters. She smiled. We can work something out, soldier. The way she said soldier made it sound like a slur. That night, I didn't go home because I had no home. I checked into a dingy motel by the highway, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. I had seen villages turn to ash, had patched up bleeding children and whispered fake comfort to dying comrades. But this was something else. It wasn't war. It was betrayal wrapped in lawn chairs and community newsletters. I'm not ashamed to say I cried. But not because I lost a house. Because I lost the last place on earth that felt like mine. My mother's rocking chair. The porch I painted with my sister. The closet where we kept Dad's old boots. Erased. And for what? Dog poop bags and a recycled water fountain? I needed someone to talk to who understood the dark corners of the system. I called Luis Ortega, a friend from my second tour, now working cybercrime for a federal agency. He owed me a favor. I pulled him out of a convoy fire once. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The property theft. The fake tax records. The HOA. Karen. All of it. He didn't hesitate. Within an hour, he was scraping public databases and cross-referencing ownership filings. What he found would make your blood boil. Fraud. Forgery. A paper trail held together by duct tape and audacity. Karen and her cronies had created fake board meeting notes, backdated signatures, and funneled land transfers through a shell company run by, get this, her cousin. Emails between board members joked about keeping the neighborhood clean of certain types. One message said, flip that soldier's dirt and keep it HOA pure. Another, if he ever comes back, just salute and walk away. And here's the thing, if you're a man like me, if you're over 60, been through some stuff, paid your dues, you don't just let that go. You don't walk away. You don't get erased quietly. There's a moment where you stop being confused or hurt and start getting real clear. And brother, I was there. Staring down the wall of that motel room, I made myself a promise. They started this. I finish it. Not with guns. Not with lawsuits. With something far more American than any HOA bylaw ever printed. Righteous, quiet, relentless justice. I had nothing left to lose. And I was just getting started. It didn't take long before I learned that homeowners associations aren't just about mailboxes and lawn height. They're miniature governments with unchecked power and a god complex the size of Texas. Karen Mallister wasn't just running a neighborhood. She was ruling it. After that motel night, when I swore to get my home, and my dignity, back, I dove headfirst into the HOA rabbit hole. And what I found made me realize something no deployment ever taught me. The dirtiest battles are the ones fought in boardrooms, not battlefields. I started my morning the way every good soldier does. Structured, focused. I mapped out a plan. My first stop wasn't legal, not yet. It was human. I needed to understand how deep Karen's claws reached. So I walked the neighborhood, not my neighborhood, not anymore, but familiar enough to burn. I wore jeans and a hoodie, nothing military. I needed eyes without alerting the queen bee. A man watering his grass flinched when I nodded hello. A mother hustled her kids off their bikes when I walked past. They didn't know me, but they'd been trained, conditioned to fear noncompliance, to avoid questions, to stay invisible unless they were clapping at HOA cookouts. I could feel it in the air. It was the kind of silence you don't hear, you sense. Like when a squad knows they're walking into an ambush, and no one says a word because they all know talking might set something off. At the corner of Birch and Cedar, I found a couple in their 70s sitting on a porch swing, the old kind with rusted chains and flaking white paint. It was the only thing in Willow Ridge that didn't look like it had been sterilized and HOA approved. I stopped and asked if they'd lived here long. The old man didn't answer at first, just looked at me like he was trying to decide whether I was a trap or a confession booth. Then he nodded. Since before the gate went up, he said. The gate, of course. Gated communities aren't just about security. They're about control. I asked him if he remembered the house that used to be on Maple Trail. His wife gave a quiet gasp. He turned to her, then back to me. Son, he said slowly. You the one who came back? I nodded. His jaw clenched, eyes going glassy. They said you sold it, his wife whispered. They said you left. I never did, I said. I was in Afghanistan. Her lips trembled. I'm sorry. Those two words hit harder than anything Karen had thrown at me. Because they were honest. Because they were rare. I didn't push them for more yet. But before I left, the old man handed me something folded in half. An old HOA newsletter from the month my house was bulldozed. Highlighted in yellow was a quote from Karen herself. The new dog park symbolizes our community's commitment to peaceful progress. We do not let abandoned spaces reflect poorly on us. I folded the paper slowly, held it for a moment, then thanked them. I spent the next few days digging through HOA documents, public ones. You'd be surprised what's accessible if you know where to look. I wasn't just looking for fraud. I was looking for a pattern. And sure enough, it was there. 5 properties, 5 had been reclaimed in the last 3 years. All due to supposed tax delinquencies. All while the owners were away. An elderly couple in assisted living. A single mom recovering from surgery. A man in federal prison for a nonviolent offense. None of them ever got their homes back. Karen was smart. Not book smart, but system smart. She knew how to bend rules without breaking them. Or at least she thought she did. Because once I got my hands on Luis's latest findings, the whole thing started to stink like week-old fish. Luis had uncovered internal HOA memos and flagged transactions that moved land titles through holding companies, all owned by someone named Douglas P. Mallister, Karen's cousin. The company name? Pure Ridge Ventures, LLC. I almost choked on my coffee. Pure Ridge. HOA purity. The theme wasn't subtle, it was smug. Worse still, Karen and her board had started enforcing new restrictions that quietly filtered out the undesirables. Military families, renters, anyone with non-standard income or volatile schedules. As one email put it, that meant shift workers, gig workers, veterans. Basically anyone not retired, rich and boring. I needed more than paperwork. I needed leverage. So I showed up to the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse looked like a small-town courthouse, complete with pillars and plaques and fake flowers. Inside, a dozen residents sat in tidy rows, sipping iced tea like they were watching a church play. Karen stood at the front, flanked by 2 yes-men in matching blazers. When she saw me, her smile didn't falter, but her eyes did. They flicked for just a second, like a squirrel spotting a hawk. Ah, she said sweetly. Mr. Ramirez, I said. You remember. Of course, she purred. I assumed you'd moved on. I didn't, I said. Turns out, neither did the land you stole. The room went quiet, not tense, dead. Karen recovered quickly. This is not the place for personal grievances. We're here to discuss community wellness initiatives and spring flower regulations. Funny, I said. You didn't ask my opinion when you turned my childhood home into a dog latrine. One of the men in blazers stepped forward, probably to intimidate. He looked like a retired dentist with a superiority complex. I didn't budge. I have documents, I said, raising a folder. Federal exemptions, title history, forged signatures. You don't have to listen to me, but you will listen to the people who show up after I leak this to every reporter in the state. Karen's lips tightened. The smile vanished like a curtain drop. Then she laughed. Cold, brittle, like glass breaking in an empty room. You think you're the first person to threaten us? You don't know how this works. These people love this community. They don't want trouble. They want order. I looked at the crowd. Some stared at their shoes. But others, an older woman, a teenage boy in the back, even the retired dentist, looked uncertain. I used to believe that, I said. Order, respect, chain of command. But order built on lies isn't peace. It's prison. The next day, Luis sent me the big one. An audio recording. Karen. In a closed-door board meeting. She was laughing. I don't care if he wears a damn medal on his chest, she said. This isn't a veteran's compound. I don't want camouflage near my kids. That land was an eyesore. I did the neighborhood a favor. My blood ran cold. Luis confirmed the recording's metadata. Date, time, location. He even had surveillance stills to confirm she was present. We had her. But I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. I didn't want just punishment. I wanted exposure, humiliation, consequences. I called a local journalist who covered civic issues. Told her I had a story about a soldier coming home to find his house erased. She bit instantly, asked if I had proof. I said, I have receipts, and a war story to go with them. We met that night in a diner just outside city limits. I laid it all out. The fraud, the quotes, the audio. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said just 2 words. Oh hell. I smiled for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just a mission now. It was a crusade. I was going to burn the lie that built this HOA 1 page at a time. The war changed me, but not in the way people think. It wasn't the firefights, the sandstorms, or the endless waiting that carved something different into my bones. It was what happened afterward, what I saw when I came home. They stole my land. They laughed about it. They buried me in paperwork and called it protocol. But they forgot who they were dealing with. I wasn't just another veteran with a sob story. I was a tactician. I knew how to break down a system piece by piece until the whole thing collapsed under its own arrogance. I didn't want revenge. I wanted precision justice. And I knew just where to start. Colonel Trent owed me a favor. During my last deployment, he once told me, if the war ever follows you home, call me. I thought he was joking. I wasn't laughing when I called him that night. He picked up on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. I told him everything. How the HOA seized my home, forged documents, mocked military families, and whitewashed it all with community newsletters and golden retrievers. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he only asked, you want this quiet or dramatic? I didn't even hesitate. Dramatic. Good, he said. Send me coordinates. I'll make a few calls. That's how Operation Civic Shield began. Not in a war room or Pentagon hallway, but in a motel room lit by a flickering bedside lamp. Trent worked fast. Within 72 hours, he'd secured preliminary approval for a field exercise. A legal military training simulation designed to test rapid response logistics in contested zones. All I had to do was prove the land was under dispute. And thanks to Luis and our evidence file the size of a phone book, we had everything we needed. Karen had built her HOA empire like a sandcastle, impressive from a distance, but one good wave and it'd wash away. And I was the wave. Luis started overlaying zoning maps with satellite data. What we uncovered was staggering. Half of Willow Ridge was standing on fraudulent permits. The new clubhouse was 12 inches over the legal boundary. The dog park had been developed over a sewer easement. 3 homes were partially built on land designated for protected runoff. Karen's vision of purity and order was nothing more than a collage of legal violations stitched together with arrogance and blind ambition. With every detail Luis uncovered, I felt my old combat instincts kick in. We weren't just reclaiming a house. We were dismantling a regime. But I needed boots on the ground. Not just soldiers, but the right soldiers. I requested a specific unit, the 189th Urban Training Battalion. They specialized in high-visibility drills. The kind with Humvees, command tents, and flagpoles that scream legitimacy. Colonel Trent pulled strings I didn't know existed. By the end of the week, I had a full operations team scheduled for deployment. A training exercise on disputed land, authorized by both the Department of Defense and local law enforcement. All legal, all real. I stood in front of a whiteboard with Trent, Luis, and a young lieutenant named Shelby. We marked every structure tied to fraudulent activity. Karen's clubhouse, the community fountain, the pool, even the meditation garden. All of it sat within the perimeter of what would soon be known as a federal simulation zone. I made one special request. I asked that the area where my home once stood be preserved. No vehicles, no tents, just space. A symbol, a reminder. Shelby nodded. We'll mark it as a primary point of origin. Symbolic foundation. The words made me choke up more than I expected. The next 72 hours were a blur of logistics. Helicopter routes, vehicle staging, communications gear. I slept maybe 4 hours the whole time. Not because I was anxious, because I was alive again. Purpose does that to a man. The morning of the operation came quietly. A fog rolled in over Willow Ridge, as if nature itself was preparing the stage. By 0600, the first convoy arrived. Humvees rumbled past manicured lawns. Camouflage tents were erected beside custom bird baths. Soldiers began walking the perimeter with clipboards and scanners, treating the entire subdivision like a forward operating base. Residents emerged in robes and slippers, confused, clutching their coffee mugs like they were holy relics. Karen came last. She stormed out of her Tudor-style fortress wearing a robe that said Queen Bee of the Ridge and a look that could curdle milk. She marched straight toward the command tent, demanding answers. I watched from a distance, sipping black coffee from a thermos Louise had brought me. She spotted me, her face flushed crimson. You, she hissed, storming over. What the hell is this? Federal training exercise, I replied calmly. Authorized, legal, necessary. You can't do this, she shouted. I'll call the mayor. I'll call the sheriff. I'll call. They already signed off, I interrupted. This is a public investigation zone. Your HOA is under review. Your land titles are in question. And your cousin? He's facing federal fraud charges as of this morning. Karen froze. For the first time, she didn't have a snarky comeback. Just rage. Raw and feral. She pointed toward the clubhouse. That's private property. Not anymore, said a soldier behind me, handing her a sealed envelope. Per Federal Code 18 to 2124. This building is being temporarily repurposed for coordination and review. This is harassment, she screamed. This is war. I looked her dead in the eyes. You started it. Within hours, the clubhouse had been transformed. Her founding mother portrait was taken down and replaced by a zoning map. Her wine fridge now held MREs and bottled water. Her trophy shelf, every plaque she awarded herself, was gone. In its place, radios, laptops, and chain-of-command flowcharts. Luis laughed when he saw it. She built herself an empire, he said. We just moved in and made it federal. By the end of the first day, media vans began arriving. Word had spread fast. A military simulation in the middle of suburbia? On land taken from a veteran? The optics alone were a PR earthquake. News anchors filmed soldiers collecting soil samples near the pool. Reporters interviewed neighbors who whispered about years of fines, threats, and paranoia. One older man even pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket. A citation Karen had issued because his American flag was not regulation height. She made us scared of our own homes, he said on camera. But not anymore. That night, I walked alone to the spot where my home once stood. The soldiers had marked it with survey flags and a small sign that read, Primary Origin. Subject Ramirez. I knelt, touched the ground, and let the silence settle. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real, present, whole. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. But as the wind rustled through the flagged grass, I whispered a promise to the land beneath me. We're taking it all back. The morning after the first phase of Operation Civic Shield was unlike anything Willow Ridge had ever seen. At precisely 0700 hours, the second wave of military vehicles arrived. This time with engineers, logistics officers, and 2 mobile command trailers flanked by American flags whipping in the spring wind. To an outsider, it might have looked like a small-scale disaster response or maybe a FEMA exercise. But for those of us who knew what really happened, it was poetic justice wearing combat boots. Karen Mallister had gone suspiciously quiet after yesterday's public confrontation. Word around the neighborhood was that she locked herself in her house after the cameras showed up and refused to speak to anyone but her inner circle of HOA loyalists. The same group that once fined a man $250 for leaving his garbage cans out past 8 a.m. Now, they were getting notes taped to their doors by uniformed officers with official federal seals. As soldiers established checkpoints at both subdivision entrances, residents were handed briefings outlining the training zone, property line evaluations, and a list of contested structures slated for review. Some folks reacted with confusion, others with anger, but a surprising number nodded in quiet relief. They'd lived under Karen's thumb for so long, they forgot what it felt like to breathe freely. I watched it unfold from the command trailer, seated between Luis and a young officer named Grant who was overseeing compliance verification. The map spread across the table in front of us was marked with color-coded zones. Red for illegal construction, orange for encroachment, green for neutral. By our latest calculations, nearly 40% of Willow Ridge was in violation of zoning codes or tied to fraudulent paperwork. That included the tennis courts, the newly remodeled wellness center, and, most ironic of all, Karen's own property, which straddled a utility corridor that had never been disclosed to residents or the county. "You realize what this means?" Luis said, tapping the section in question. "Her master bedroom sits on land technically owned by the municipality. She built a sunroom over a storm drainage easement." "So what you're saying," I replied, "is her house is a liability wrapped in stucco." Grant smirked. "We could file for emergency review. If she built on public infrastructure, she's not just in violation, she's trespassing." "Let's hold off," I said. "The media needs time to catch up. Let them film a few more flags first." And boy, did the media show up. By mid-morning, a dozen news vans lined the outer perimeter of the neighborhood. Reporters from national outlets were broadcasting live while residents held up signs. Some supportive, some angry, all confused. One elderly man wore his Vietnam veteran cap and waved an American flag at every passing Humvee. He saluted me when I walked by. I saluted back. It wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was personal. Around noon, Karen finally emerged. Her hair was disheveled, makeup hastily applied, and she wore a pressed blouse under her robe like she just remembered how to be in charge. She dragged a folding table out to the clubhouse lawn, well, what used to be the clubhouse, and set up a makeshift podium with a megaphone. A few HOA board members, clearly rattled but too scared to resist, gathered around her like sheep in a thunderstorm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice trembling, "this is an outrageous violation of our rights. This subdivision was built on trust, order, and community values. We are under attack by a rogue element abusing government power." A few residents clapped half-heartedly. Most stood back with arms crossed. A group of moms wearing yoga pants whispered among themselves, then walked away mid-speech. Karen doubled down. "This so-called soldier," she pointed toward me, "has misrepresented himself and brought chaos to our peaceful neighborhood. He has slandered your board, defamed our community, and endangered your property values with his vendetta." I walked forward, calm, measured, just enough to be seen but not to interrupt. The cameras zoomed in, the mics turned toward me, and for a moment, the entire neighborhood held its breath. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Then a lieutenant stepped from the crowd and laid a sealed letter onto her folding table. "This," he said into the microphone, "is an official notice from the Federal Land Review Board. Due to documented fraud, misuse of zoning authority, and obstruction of property rights, Willow Ridge Homeowners Association is now under full legal audit. Effective immediately, all HOA operations are suspended pending review." Karen went pale. "You can't do this," she barked, her voice cracking. "I am the HOA." A few scattered laughs broke the silence. Someone from the crowd yelled, "Not anymore, lady." She tried to rally her board, but they looked away. One of them, Tom Myers, the treasurer, actually apologized to me under his breath before slipping away into his minivan. Her empire was crumbling one cinder block at a time. That evening, Karen tried to save face by calling a press conference from her driveway. She arranged chairs, printed handouts, and even attempted to live stream on her tablet. But when she began reading her statement blaming deep state overreach, accusing the military of fabricating evidence, and calling me a disgruntled squatter with a grudge. The local news anchors cut away mid-broadcast. Too much noise. Not enough credibility. But the final nail in the coffin came from Luis, who had been quietly working behind the scenes all day. He handed me a flash drive with a grim expression. "I found something," he said. The footage was from a closed-door HOA meeting. Security cam, unbeknownst to Karen, still functional. In it, she laughed with her bored about demolishing my home. "He'll never come back," she said. "And if he does, we'll just throw the flag in his face and tell him to go salute a light pole." That video hit the internet at 7:13 p.m. By 8 o'clock, it had 100,000 views. By 9 o'clock, the Department of Veterans Affairs had issued a public statement condemning HOA abuses and reaffirming protections for deployed service members. At 10:22 p.m., Karen's name was trending nationwide with hashtags like #JusticeForCole and #HOAHell. I stepped out that night, walking the newly cleared lot where my house had once stood. Soldiers passed by, nodding. Neighbors waved. One woman approached, holding a casserole and tears. She apologized for never speaking up. "We were scared," she said. "We didn't want to lose our homes." "You already did," I said gently. "You just didn't know it." But now they did. Everyone did. And the next morning the bulldozers came, not to destroy but to rebuild. I never thought rebuilding a porch swing would make me cry. But there I was, calloused hands holding a hammer, eyes stinging not from sawdust but from everything that had been taken, and everything finally coming back. The sun hung low over Willow Ridge, casting long shadows across what used to be the battlefield of my stolen home. Now it was a construction zone, but one humming with purpose. Strangers were now allies. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now showed up with casseroles, toolkits, and worn-out apologies. The foundation had been poured 2 days earlier, mapped exactly to the original blueprint down to the inch. One of the soldiers, a kid no older than my nephew, had used his off hours to laser cut a new address plate for the front gate, 1428 Maple Trail. Same numbers, same lettering, but now they weren't just marking a place. They were reclaiming a history. Karen Mallister was gone, disgraced. Her house sat dark, stripped of its self-awarded accolades and Queen Bee signage. The once feared HOA office was now a makeshift archive center, where boxes of shredded letters, altered documents, and falsified signatures were being reviewed by federal agents and property rights attorneys. The woman who once barked at people about mailbox alignment was now the subject of a pending indictment. Fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, embezzlement, the whole menu. Last I heard, she'd lawyered up and left town in a borrowed Prius, ducking reporters and trying to erase a digital footprint that the internet had already tattooed into history. The residents she used to control now walked freely. No more measuring grass length. No more citations for wind chimes or non-conforming birdhouses. One man even painted his front door firetruck red just because he could. I stopped by. "You always wanted to do it, huh?" I asked. 10 years, he said, laughing. 10 damn years of beige. I finally feel like I live here. That was the shift. The fear was gone. The grip of quiet tyranny, the forced conformity, the false order masked as community spirit. It all dissolved like a bad dream. And in its place came noise. Beautiful, messy, human noise. Kids playing soccer on grass that hadn't been trimmed to military standards. A jazz band rehearsing on someone's front porch. People grilling out front instead of hiding in their backyards. Real community, born not from policy but from pain. They asked me to join the newly formed civic association. No dues, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. I declined leadership but helped draft the charter. One clause stood out. It was my only condition. No property enforcement action may be taken against a currently serving military member or veteran without written federal review and independent council approval. They called it the Ramirez Clause. I didn't need my name on it. I just needed the promise kept. Across the street, Luis was still digging. Even after everything, the man wouldn't rest. He'd uncovered another trail, subdivisions in other counties with similar HOA boards and forged filings. Different faces, same playbook. Karen wasn't an anomaly. She was a prototype, a local tyrant with a taste for control and a network of shell corporations. This might be bigger than we thought, he told me over coffee one morning. You sure you're done after this? I looked across the lot, watching two volunteers dig holes for fence posts where my backyard used to end. I'm done here, I said, but I'll help from a distance. Someone has to make sure this doesn't happen again. The house came together faster than anyone expected. It wasn't just my hands building it. It was a whole town that needed redemption. Veterans groups donated materials. A local tradesman refused to charge labor. Even a scout troop showed up to help paint the porch. That swing, that memory of my mother sipping lemonade with the radio humming in the background. We rebuilt that first. It wasn't just a place to sit. It was an altar to everything they tried to erase. I hammered in the last nail myself. The sound echoed across the yard. Not loud, but permanent. By the time the siding went up, the media had cycled on to other stories. The headlines faded. The hashtags stopped trending. But I didn't mind. This wasn't for them. It never was. This was for every soldier who came home to silence, to loss, to legalese written by cowards in khakis and HOA boardrooms. One morning, as I was painting the window trim, a boy rode past on his bike and stopped. He stared at the house for a long while. Did they really tear it down while you were gone? He asked. I nodded. But you built it again? Not alone, I said. A lot of people helped. He stared at the porch swing. It looks like it always belonged there. I smiled. It always did. That night, the community held a small ceremony. No media, no speeches, just a gathering, a few folding chairs, some candles. People brought photos, shared memories, spoke truths they had swallowed for years. A woman confessed she once fined her own neighbor because Karen threatened to raise her HOA fees. A teenager admitted he used to spy on residents for extra allowance from the board. No one judged. We just listened. We forgave. We moved forward. They unveiled a plaque. Bronze. Simple. Elegant. It read, "This land was reclaimed with honor. Beneath it, my mother's name. And my unit." The porch swing creaked gently in the wind, like applause from the past. I sat there long after everyone left. Alone but not lonely. I remembered the silence after the first shell exploded near our convoy. The ringing in my ears. The dirt in my teeth. The screams. I remembered thinking, back then, that I could survive anything. And I had. But nothing prepared me for the silence that comes when your country forgets you. When your home becomes a dog park, and your identity is reduced to a file number in a city clerk's drawer. But now that silence was gone, replaced by the buzz of power saws, the laughter of neighbors, and the creak of a swing rebuilt from memory and defiance. They sold my land while I was deployed. They thought I wouldn't come back. But I did. And I didn't just return. I rebuilt. I reclaimed. I reminded them that some things are worth fighting for. Not with bullets, but with truth. With a nail. With a name carved into wood that no bulldozer can erase. And now, when I sit here, with the flag waving above me and the swing moving gently under the stars, I finally feel at peace. Not because the war is over, but because I turned it into something they could never steal again, home.